Nobody else.
Gotcha.
No.
Hey, my boss is still in
It's
Englewood
like
water.
pretty
Once I get to
it's Swedish was my understanding. I think he's their COO. So this kind of jumped out at me.
What's it called?
Highlands Ranch. But he's got a
What kind of ice cream?
hell of a resume.
Oh, no kidding.
That was a part that I thought it
Yeah,
was
because it's
because they
herbal.
lived in Englewood, but probably a place you can drink.
Huh.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
With
You wanted to go visit?
Good evening. Welcome to this evening's City Council study session. I'd like to call this meeting to order. Our first agenda item this evening is signature events update for 2018. Communications Manager Alison Carney is here to give City Council an update on the 2018 signature events. Good evening.
Good evening. Long time for me. It's good to be back. Signature events coming up this season. So we'll start with the Sounds of Summer concert series, which is newly classified as a signature event, first time this year. So this year we're doing 6 concerts, Thursday nights starting June 14th and running through July. We won't have one on July 5th, the day after the 4th of July. This year we cut it to fewer concerts and spent a little bit more money on getting bands. So we're hoping to see better turnout of crowds. And then on July 26th, we're trying something completely new, which is shutting down the circle. And Breckenridge Brewery has agreed to be our sponsor. MOA has agreed to be our nonprofit. And they will be able to sell beer out here in the circle area during that concert. And that's a big, I don't know if you're familiar with Face. They're a all-vocal rock band. But they draw a pretty big crowd, so we're expecting that night to be a really big night. So then the 4th of July is going to be basically the same as it has in the past at Cornerstone and Bellevue Park. Starting at 3 o'clock, we have 11 food vendors and a lot of the same kid activities, bouncy slides and water things. We do have a band coming at 7, Dragon Deer, and that will be at Cornerstone Park on our stage. And then the fireworks are at 9:30. And last but not least is the Englewood Block Party. I sent out the announcement that registration is open on Friday. So hopefully the business community is aware of that. I presented to the merchants of downtown Englewood this morning, Mode, and asked them to also pass along that message that registration is open until July 31st or until we're full, and we don't expect that we'll make it until July 31st. We can have about 60 booths this year. We have, since Friday, we have 10 registered already. And we're doing something a little bit different this year. We're charging a fee for all vendors. Last year it was free to everyone, but this year will be $75 for Englewood businesses and $125 for businesses outside of Englewood. The Historic Preservation Society is going to partner with Be a Tool Neighborhood Rehabilitation Project. So we'll have 2 nonprofits on the beer side. So they'll be selling tickets, doing the wristbands, and collecting all of the revenue. Be a Tool is the same day on September 8th. So they'll be in the morning, and then we're doing kind of a serve, then celebrate. So they can volunteer in the morning and then come to the block party and volunteer there too. No, they can come celebrate at the block party, but they'll also be running the beer sales with the Historic Preservation Society. And the road, Broadway will be closing at 10 this year. It takes a long time to set up the generators, the stage, and sound. We were cutting it really close last year. So we all agreed that we'll close it at 10, even though the event doesn't start until 3. But we'll make sure all the businesses on the 3400 block are aware of that. And I plan to hold maybe a happy hour, business happy hour sometime on Broadway in July, so businesses can come and ask questions. Breckenridge Brewery is going to also do that. They were really excited this year to do it again. I think they had a good time last year. So, and that's kind of how we got them for our test run for the Sounds of Summer. It was a package deal, and they're like, okay, we'll come to that, but we really want to do the block party. So I think those are all the details.
Any questions or comments? Amy, or Councilmember Martinez,
Thank you. I have
apologize.
a question. You said we had 60 vendor booths this year. Is that the same that we had last year, or are we going to have more this year?
We'll have a little bit more this year. Last year we had the NFL truck that we had to account for, and we had more food trucks coming last year that couldn't make it at the very last minute, so we left room for those things. This year, and we were pretty packed in there last year, so knowing what the space that we have to work with, we think we can get 60. It's like Tetris.
Thank you. Councilmember Wink.
Thanks very much, Allison. I'm very excited to hear about all these events. Regarding the block party, what's the difference over the number of booths this year from last year? Is that what Amy just asked? So 60 this year? What? Sorry.
Last year, I think the total that showed up and set up was 53.
And how
and
many
we
rented
had-
booths? That
What?
So 53 showed up, which...
Yeah, so we had two food trucks that we left space for. That one got robbed that weekend, and
I
all their
see.
equipment was gone. And the ice cream truck broke down on its way there and never came. So we had more room that we left for those two things that they never came. And then maybe a week before, we squeezed in the NFL truck at the very south end of the block, and that was really big. We had to bump a blow-up jousting ring that Parks and Rec had ordered. So without those additions this year, we feel comfortable with saying that we'll schedule 60.
Yeah, great. And what time did we begin closing Broadway last year?
It was 11 or 12.
Oh, so not so far.
Not too much.
And that was still cutting it close.
And it was
so we're
cutting
trying-
it.
Okay.
Our sound people were really
Scrambling
not
a
happy with us.
Okay. That's
But
fair.
we know more things. One thing with the stage, it was really hard to get it centered in the road and still leave enough room for a fire truck once we realized that the hitch stayed down and took up more room than we were. But now we know all of those things, so we'll be a little bit quicker.
I'm sure you can imagine what I'm going to ask next.
Don't know.
Have you discussed any specific outcomes from any of these or all of these events in terms of visitors, revenue, any metrics that you're predicting or shooting for that you can assess afterwards so we can know?
Well, it's hard because
what
none
worked
of
and what
these
didn't work.
are ticketed events, so it's hard to gauge numbers. Last year we were able, after the block party, to present the sales tax collected around that time for the businesses along that block.
And is that the only metric you're looking at again this year?
That is a good question.
Year sold.
That's a very good
That's
metric.
probably one of the very
Questa?
few venues we have that will
So,
actually
yeah.
have it. Yeah, that.
And for the Sounds of Summer, since that's the only concert, it's the very last concert,
The 26th.
the 26th. So the first 5, we're going to try to track numbers and then compare that to the last one and see if we go a little bit bigger on the music and if we close the circle. And I don't think I mentioned we'll have 2 food trucks and a dessert truck and at least 1 food truck at all of the others, probably 2.
Right.
And if we get beer, we're going to do the comparison. That's our test
Okay.
to see what a difference is.
Just considerations for making it better and easier on staff as we move forward in future years. Thanks, Allison.
Councilmember Questa.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. This might be common knowledge amongst the group. How is the funding for the 4th of July split up? And Allison, you may know the answer, City Manager Keck, yourself.
Well, for the actual, you mean with the other cities that
Yes,
participate?
correct.
So Arapahoe County, Sheridan, Littleton, and South Suburban Parks and Rec all chip in for the actual fireworks display. And so those are really their only hard costs. And then the city covers, the additional porta potties and all the other expenses, but South Suburban, since they run Cornerstone, their staff is really hands-on in the whole planning and that day. We couldn't do it without South Suburban there too.
Is it an even four-way split between
No.
municipalities? You just
No, I
described?
could get you that.
Okay.
They're all a little bit different.
Gotcha. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor Protem.
Thank you. Councilmember Olson.
Thank you. Thanks for your update. I wanted to ask a few more questions about tracking, too. What's the plan for marketing this year? What did we learn last year? And what would be the venues, especially for the block?
Well, the block party is interesting because we don't, with the NFL bus coming a week or two before, we don't know how much that helped because they promote, they have such a big following that it's hard to say how much that helped us. So that I don't think that that won't hurt us this year, but we also have a new communications specialist on board, and he was a marketing for the business school in Madison. So he has a lot of great fun ideas. So we just came up with a marketing plan for the July 26th concert today. But as far as marketing the block party, I think one thing that will help us this year is that all the businesses are so excited and they all have their own social media followers and they'll all be posting. I saw the Englewood Grand already posted something about it on their own. So I think we're just going to have a lot of organic marketing from everybody who's participating. And a lot of things, a lot of vendors will want to announce that they're going to be there. So I think that will help too.
So following up a little bit further on the tracking, are there areas that you would want us to come up with that we'd like to know over time? Or do you have categories? I mean, it's hard to figure out numbers when you don't have ticketed events, but there are ways to sort of police do it all the time, actually, estimate how many are in a crowd and get some kind of sense on each one so we know which ones are more successful than others over time. I don't know if we have that or...
Yeah, I mean, are you asking if I want you to come up with those?
I mean, is that what you're doing already, is tracking how many you think were there?
Yeah, last year we say 3,000. Actually, that was
Total, right?
Yeah, with the help of the police that were there. Yeah.
I'm thinking for each event so we know some things didn't go as well over time.
Yeah, and I think
over 5 years we should have a good
Yeah.
trend of figuring out some things that seem to...
And I think the 4th of July is a little bit tougher too because it's spread over the two parks and it just gets so big. And as the day goes on, it gets so packed. I was
thinking more of the other things that are newer.
Yeah, I think for the Sounds of Summer, I think we'll be able to track this year, especially because we're going to care about seeing if the 26 makes a difference. Mm-hmm. So we're going to be watching that. The block party. I think what we might see is that we get a little bit big for that one block.
That'd be nice.
Yeah, I think that's what. But as far as tracking other than the police's eye.
Good. Looks like some good stuff. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Berentine.
Since I've been involved with the city, we've had numbers, between 30 and 50,000 people that come in to the 4th of July event, and we do absolutely nothing to bring them into the city or connect them with the city. I do believe that there's additional help from the police departments from the other, and we certainly are able to put a dollar amount to that. So I think that's part of their contribution as well for services that they're doing. But so, yeah, when we include that, we have to make sure that we're including all of that piece of it. But the businesses have, over the last several years, had some really great ideas about how to go ahead and incorporate the downtown area, Englewood, city center area in with that. And I think if we can't learn lessons from the events that have been going on for as long as the 4th of July and how to make money and incorporate some attention to our businesses and our other business areas, then we're not going to be as successful with newer events. So I think we really need to talk to the businesses and some of the ideas that they had about incorporating somewhat of an all-day event so that they can go ahead and reap the benefit of 30 to 50,000 people coming into this community to enjoy something that we're paying a lot of money for, and we would like to make sure that we're making the best bang for the buck on that event. And that would probably include something like the Sherwood bus of what they're doing, incorporating some events that are going on from the businesses downtown so that there's a day piece of that, maybe utilizing the parking that we have in the downtown area and city center here so that we could go ahead and then transfer people over there so that they can enjoy more of the day. And those have been suggestions that the businesses have been making for some time. So I would really like to see as much of that incorporated or at least supported, because they're willing to do that. They're not asking us for money for it. They're just asking for some partnership in it. So hopefully we can do that this time, because we've had pretty consistent numbers. There must be some way that they're counting all that. The other was about getting some food trucks, and if we have vendors that go into that event, that we're focusing first on our Englewood businesses first to try and get some attention to them. Maybe it wouldn't be a bad idea if Bob's could do somebody could do a beer or one of the craft beer places, or that they could set up and do some things. I don't know what that would entail if we ended up doing something like that. If we don't want to have any alcohol type thing, then maybe we could at least make sure that we're giving some preference to our businesses and getting that in there. The community officer that used to do that did an amazing job, and they made a lot of money. They made a lot of money. They paid for that event, and then when she went away, somehow all of that she probably did a lot of work to make that happen, but I think we could start there when we have such a huge influx of people with money and families and barbecuing, and they're here all day anyway, so maybe we could do a little bit more with that. Otherwise, thanks for your time.
Thank you. So why did we incorporate Sounds of Summer into our signature events? I mean, we've been doing that for quite a while, right? Mm-hmm. So it's just we're getting more bands that are maybe well known to increase that. Are we going to, the food truck and the dessert truck are going to be at every concert. And so are they charged a fee also for, and then they pay sales tax to us as well? Okay. And when does the magazine, the fall magazine, come out?
The beginning of August.
Okay, so we're going to advertise in there also, right, for the block party?
The block party.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you very much for all the work you're doing.
Thank you.
Our next agenda item is the 2017 Comprehensive Annual Financial Report. Accounting Manager Kevin Engles is here to discuss the 2017 Comprehensive Annual Financial Report. Good evening.
Thank you. Evening, Council.
Good evening.
Hi there.
Kathy Wrinkle and I have a couple of guests here with us. Wendy Swanhorst, and I believe in the audience is Jim Hinkle. They're both with our auditing firm of Hinkle & Company. And we're here this evening to present the 2017 Audited Comprehensive Annual Financial Report. I believe Wendy has a couple of comments, and then we'll take any questions you have.
Thank you.
Oh, good evening.
Welcome.
Thank you. So I just want to let you guys know that your finance staff puts this thing together, this Kaffir we call it, Comprehensive Annual Financial Report. This is not a small endeavor for them. They do a very good job putting this all together. Our one contribution to this is our opinion that tells you we believe the numbers are in here are fairly stated in all material respects. And then the other thing that we give you is this letter, which you've probably seen. We call it our management letter. It just tells you what we did and what we found. And so our goal when we come is to give you that opinion that tells you that we agree with the numbers and we think they're all fairly stated. But our other responsibility under the auditing standards is if we identify any significant deficiencies in your internal controls, and those could be anything that would misstate these numbers by a material amount or allow for fraud to happen. And if we see anything like that, we would report that to you in this letter. And the good news for you is that we didn't identify anything we thought rose to that level. You've got some good procedures and processes in place. So we have a lot of confidence in your finance department and what they do. So really, other than that, unless you have questions, that's really all I needed to tell you.
Great, thank you. Any questions or comments from council? In looking at this, I was very impressed with how well it's put together, and I just want to thank staff for all the hard work also.
And all the departments contribute.
Okay.
It is a huge endeavor, and I think this year especially when we transferred from one accounting system to another to be able to get this clean of an audit, it's an amazing feat, and I want to echo the thanks.
All right. Thank you so much. Councilmember Wink?
It may be more for more senior members of council and staff than you all, but for how long have we aligned with Hinkle and Company?
This is our
Second year.
Second year.
Previous to that, we had another firm for about 15 years. Yeah, 15 years.
Performing the same parameter
audit
of duties, yeah.
Correct. Yeah, we did an RFP 2 years ago for the 16 and now 17 audits. So.
Yep. Excellent. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions or comments?
I just want to make a comment, Mayor. I think Kevin is being very humble. Kevin has really led the effort to put this together, and so thanks to Kevin Engles and his accounting team of Christine Hart and Kathy Kasai for their diligent efforts on putting this together. It is a major undertaking, and this is done in addition to all the normal accounting work that's done day to day. So, and Kathy as well for helping with the management and discussion letter in this book.
And it was put together early, too, ahead of schedule. So we greatly
Typical
appreciate
to the schedule we kept last year, but yeah, we're trying
Close.
to get it done as
Yeah.
quick as possible so they'll have the financials for.
All right. Councilmember Wilson.
Thank you. Director Engel, thank you again, as everyone has said. I wanted to ask if over this last year, if there was anything in particular that was more difficult to keep track of, or if we were doing anything that made it harder to do this well, or is it getting easier? I know, other than the change of the software is a big deal, right?
Yeah,
So
I think that was the biggest change. The change of the software has made it easier for us to gather the data, and we're looking forward to Kevin's launching into a project in August where we are using the module in our new financial system to hopefully mechanize a lot more of this even.
I have one more question too. There have been folks in the past who have said the Kaffir really doesn't tell us anything. And for the public in general, could you say what you think is really important for them to know why this is important and what we count on it for, and where, if there are other areas that aren't accounted for here, how we actually take care of those? That's not an easy.
That's a tall order.
I mean,
I'd say we use this. The most important thing in here that you can see, I think, is the letter that says we're fairly stating our financials. I think the next thing you can see is, in general, how do the revenues line up against the expenses. So from that standpoint, I would say those are the basics for the community. We have a lot of other detail with the other funds and so forth. And I'm sorry, the last part of the question was?
was there anything other than the software shift over, which is not a small thing? Was there anything else this last year that made it more difficult?
Wendy made mention to the pensions. The pensions are becoming way more complex, and we were wishing them away, but we knew that wasn't going to happen. In fact, they're even going to get more complex from where they are today.
Changes in laws.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you very much for your hard work.
Councilmember Martinez.
Thank you. I was going to ask a similar question to Councilmember Olson about the software switchover, so I think you answered that. Thank you. And just thank you for putting this all together. It's really helpful, and I'm sure it was a massive undertaking, and it's really nice to see it all here, and you can tell all the hard work you guys went through, so thank you, everyone.
And the key thanks goes to our accounting team, Kevin leading that, and our auditor who's done a thorough job of going through it to make sure everything's where it should be.
It's beautiful. Thank you.
Councilmember Berentine.
I think in part to answer your question, I was at CML last year, and this issue came up as well. And I think it was Alamosa, had a huge amount of money being embezzled, and they're past their Kaffir. They actually won that award, although I think you paid to get that thing. But was the understanding that the Kaffir is not a forensic audit. It isn't going to go do that piece of letting you know when there's some kind of internal problem. You rely on your staff and following the process and procedures and how legitimate that is within the staff piece. This particular audit isn't necessarily going to find that. I think that's part of the question that's been brought up in the past, and I think CML did a beautiful job of answering that question last year and brought up several examples. I think in one of the towns it was a city manager, but nothing against city managers. But I don't know if it was the council or the staff, something happened. But they brought up the question during that seminar, how could that possibly happen, and haven't passed their Kaffir. And I think they really did a beautiful job of explaining what the position, what the job is of the Kaffir, as opposed to something that would be a forensic audit and do that. And I think that's where the question has come up with the citizens before. So,
And Councilmember.
yeah, hopefully you'll be able to attend that seminar this time and ask that and get a little bit more information. But I appreciate the job that you did on this and the information that it provides for what it's supposed to provide. Thanks.
Yeah, I think, I think what you're trying to say is the internal controls, that's something the city sets up, and you guys do that within your finance department. You do a really good job of that. Our responsibility as the auditors is if we see weaknesses there, that's what we would tell you about. Not necessarily that we look at every transaction or at everything that you do, but just look at those controls to make sure those processes are in place so that if something did happen, your processes would catch that.
Hopefully, yes. And that's just when something like that happens, people look at this and go, how could that have happened? And they don't understand that it's just a separate, different process. So I thought, hopefully that helps you.
So actually, can I?
Councilmember
Yeah,
Olson.
so actually I'm asking for the public, and I did go to the same workshop twice, actually, and I know that there's differences. So and first of all, I wanted to ask, do people pay for the award for the Kaffir? When I think we've gotten it like 16, 17 years in award.
We do.
34 years in a row. Yeah, you
34 years. Oh, what am I?
Yes, we do pay.
So double.
Yes, we do. It's $550 a year to submit it. It's well worth that just as another review, because they look at things that the auditors
It's
don't
not
look
paying
at.
for the award, it's paying for the review that awards
the
right?
application.
So if you don't pass it, if someone doesn't think it
Yeah, if there's
meets
some
muster, you
things
won't.
missing, they will.
But if you don't pay, you don't get it either.
Correct.
Right. But if you didn't do a good job, you wouldn't get it.
Right.
So, but there's a fee for someone to actually look it over. I just wanted to make that clear. The other thing is, I do think that people look at this, and just like the couple of cities that have been mentioned, some of the problems that they've had in it should have been caught by a Kaffir, though, in terms of processes, shouldn't they have? I mean, one of the situations that I heard about was perhaps not really drilling down on some things. Is that not the case?
Really what should be happening is that you have the internal controls internally so that if there's an error, just a human error in your accounting processes, you should have a review or control of some kind in place so that someone would catch that. And the same goes for fraud. If you had fraud, you should have some controls in place to catch that. And, I know sometimes, if people collude or things happen, sometimes you don't even catch that in your controls. Most of the fraud is not caught by an auditor. We're not in here looking at every transaction or everything. What we really hope is that we look at your controls, and if we see weaknesses there, we'll tell you about that. But, an auditor's not here long enough to catch something like that, which is why we focus on the controls and why you guys have so many controls in place here, because we would expect anything like that to be caught by your internal controls.
And you're looking for multiple eyes in some ways, right, as checkpoints.
Yes,
And that's
absolutely.
that's what I was trying to get at, and I guess I'll just say it. That's what these offer us, is some look at that process. Now, people cannot follow it, I guess, and be lying, but you have to be colluding quite a bit to do that. But I do think this is a valuable tool, and it's not, I mean, how many do you see that are not well done?
Of the Kaffir.
Where you have a lot of red flags that you give to folks, and
That happens sometimes, especially, if a smaller government where they don't have maybe the amount of staff that you guys have, they really can't have that segregation and have two people, like you said, look at everything. And, they just have to be a lot more diligent with their controls in a situation like that.
thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Thank you all for your work. Thank you for coming, and
Thank you.
greatly appreciate it.
See you next year.
The next item on the agenda is the proposed 2019 budget timeline overview and assumptions update. City Manager Eric Keck is here to discuss the proposed 2019 budget timeline overview and assumptions update. Good evening, Mr. Keck.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Thank you for this opportunity to provide you with the overview of our budget and where we're going to be headed this year. As has been the case in previous years, at least last year as well, we have had a number of study sessions already to discuss the budget. However, this year we think we've been a little bit more robust than in the past. So tonight in your packet you had a couple of things. One is a timeline that we'll discuss in greater detail this evening, as well as a PowerPoint that is coming up right now that you've seen already back in March, late March, that talks about the assumptions that were utilized or will be utilized to help create the budget. And so we're going to take some time to walk through that again tonight, because I think it's very important for both you and the public to understand the basis by which we are moving forward with this.
Sorry, this isn't working.
Oh,
Yeah, I'm
sorry.
sure it's plugged in here
Yeah.
or something.
Oh, you need some
Power's-
power. Gotcha.
Not
So,
plugged in.
Yeah, it looks like that unplugged.
Does help.
So,
Thank you.
again, as just as the memorandum states, we began this budget process in earnest really back in February of 2018, putting together the plans and the processes that we're going to be utilizing to create the budget. As part of this particular review tonight, what we want to do is, again, to go over some of the budget assumptions, which we'll start here in a second. But I want to enunciate to you that we rely very heavily on the Department of Revenue Affairs, DORA, excuse me, sound like I have puberty, DORA and or DOLA, and their economists to help us with respect to getting this data. And so for 2018, the assumptions that you have in the packet tonight are 18 assumptions that they feel are going to roll into 19. But the 19 assumptions are still being created. We typically don't get those until the end of this month or early July. And because we're ahead of our normal schedule, as well as going farther than what's required by the charter with council participation in the budget, we still have the 18 assumptions. I think it's important, though, for us also to understand that both myself and I believe Jennifer Nolan, who is our budget manager, has been looking very carefully at our economic assumptions for 2019. And Dr. Richard Wobekint, who is the chief economist with the University of Colorado at Boulder, has basically stated that right now, the 2018 to 2019 are going to be very similar with their constituent makeup of the economic indicators and markers, primarily because we're starting to see some cooling off of the economy, largely predicated again by interest rates that have been promulgated by the Federal Open Market Committee. As you're aware, we've already seen 100 basis points increase this year. We do anticipate that the Federal Open Market Committee and Janet Yellen will increase 2 more times yet this year. So we'll see 50 basis points probably maybe this month, and then 50 maybe later on. And there could be a third, depending upon some of the reports looking at how the economy is growing or not growing. And the biggest impact these interest rates have had not here in the Denver market, has been on housing, because obviously as the interest rate increases, it makes it difficult for housing attainment for people who are looking to acquire loans because they're having to pay more for their housing. So as we look into 2019, there are some headwinds that we need to be concerned with. Number one, again, interest rates, but also because the interest rates are increasing, we're seeing less inflation, which is a positive thing, except for perhaps in regions, such as this region. And the Denver metro, or the Intermountain range as they call it, that includes Utah and Denver. From an economic standpoint, those key indices are still rising. So we're still seeing inflation here because the economy is still growing at a rapid rate, and people are still migrating to these areas for jobs. So those are some things that we're looking at very carefully. Other headwinds, obviously, there are things that we cannot foresee, global issues. Somebody bombed somebody else, or there's some sort of terroristic activity. That has an impact on our economy as well. And specifically for us here in Englewood, because we rely so heavily upon sales and use tax, we need to be very concerned with the global economy and how that works, because specifically that could have a really deleterious or negative impact on the growth of our sales tax. As you heard just last week, Director Wrinkle made a presentation that discussed how our sales tax and use tax is up over the previous year slightly, and we're seeing that sales and use tax is still growing, largely, again, buoyed by the fact that we have several people now that are actually paying the city internet sales tax, which is something that we haven't seen before. That's been extremely helpful. And the fact that our citizenry continue to purchase products of large scale, whether it be automobiles or other durable goods, that are then, those sales are reported back to the city of Englewood because of residency. So that's been helpful. And again, that's largely predicated upon growth. So, talking about assumptions again, we'll get going here. Again, we're just looking at some of the preliminary revenue expenditure assumptions. What we've already done is seek the council's input on the operating and capital. We're going to do more of that, obviously, in the coming weeks, and we'll go over that schedule here as well this evening. As you remember, this is the timeline. We had a study session where we went over some of these items, the assumptions, back in March. In April and May, we actually had a couple other workshops back on the 9th of April and the 23rd of April. We had 2 other workshops thus far, again, seeking some council direction and input for some of the other higher level budgetary concerns. And clearly, we try to lump those into some buckets. So capital being one major bucket that still pulls money out of the general fund. There are personnel considerations that we have, and we've got some input from you on that, and there's some other input that's yet to be forthcoming. Council may recall that we just started negotiations on the Englewood Police Benefits Association contract that expires at the end of this year. By charter, we're allowed only to begin around May 15th, or on around May 15th, must be concluded by July 1. And so we're in the thick of trying to negotiate the 1920 contract with them right now, but we still have a long way to go with that. And so that will also inform, to a certain extent, obviously, our personnel costs. But we're also cognizant and aware that the council wants to see a census comparison of our current staffing levels across the board, as well as any new positions that might be forthcoming. And heretofore, obviously, one of those that we've discussed in great detail has been the notion of creating an emergency manager position for the city. So that's one position that I know will be coming forward. Others will begin to see those come forward as the departments put together their 2019 budgets. And I expect that I'll have those by the end of this month, early July, and begin to see and share that data with the council at future workshops wherein, again, we're going to see those requests for new personnel. And then lastly, we have the operating budget. So the 3 big ones, capital, personnel, and operating, are the 3. At this point in time, council, we do not see any major changes with respect to operating budget that are out there. Again, the cost of goods and services to the city, or COGS, that we have increased from time to time, predicated again on open market forces. And so consumables, fuels, those types of things that we utilize in the day-to-day execution of duties, those costs fluctuate. And so we'll probably see and try to attribute a slight increase to that, again, predicated on some of the data that you're going to see again tonight from the state, where they believe those costs are going to increase or go. Tomorrow night, part of the capital budget process, while you're interviewing candidates, I'll be speaking with the Planning and Zoning Commission to them about the capital budget as required by the Englewood Home Rule Charter and specifically the duties of the Planning and Zoning Commission. So that'll be transpiring tomorrow. They're going to be making recommendations of prioritized projects that may exist already or need to exist in the capital budget for 2019 and beyond that impact impact the ability for the comprehensive plan to do its thing, or development, and how that might inform capital projects. So moving along here, as required by the charter again, the budget itself, the submission of the budget to you, the City Council, has to be done no later than September 15th of each year, and we're on target for that right now. Public hearing must then occur after that, within 3 weeks after the submission of the budget. That right now, again, is scheduled for September 17th, and we're going to go over those dates as well on the calendar here shortly. So, again, in the past, I believe staff didn't have the interaction that they're having the past few years with the budget with the council, but we like to obviously include you as soon as possible so we can understand where you are thinking policy level, but also things from a policy level that'll impact the operations of the city. And so that's why we're spending as much time as we are. And then clearly, we need to have our budget adopted by that second business meeting in October so that the county can certify our mill levy. The risk of not having a budget approved during that time frame is that the county then would give you the same mill levy that you have in your current year, which is 18, if we're unable to pass a budget. We don't want to go there. That has disastrous impacts upon the budget. Not to mention that there could have to be layoffs, or there could have to be other service analysis that would require programs to be suspended, and it would be very, very detrimental to capital projects. So we are hopefully early enough and on target to avoid that.
We haven't had that problem in the past, have we, since you've been here?
Not since I've been here, but I just wanted to point out the detrimental impact. People have always asked. I think last year we came close because what transpired was that we had people who weren't present for the budget adoption, and it was a 3-2 vote. That wasn't the charter has stricter requirements for the budget approval than it does for normal approvals, and so we weren't able to move forward. People said, "Oh yeah, we adopted the budget," but as you recall, we had to bring it back again and go through the full 2 readings again, and that cut us really close. So we had a safety, but we don't want to do that again because we would have ended up with the 17 fiscal year budget this current fiscal year if we wouldn't have gone back and did it again.
So do we had safety in the fact that we had an extra meeting? Do we have that?
There is safety again this year.
Okay.
Yeah. So, but it's very tight.
Right.
But we're there.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. So, if we look at, again, just as a reminder, we've been using priority-based budgeting underlying methodology. We've been utilizing what we're now calling it budgeting for community goals. Those community goals or the priorities have not changed since we began this process. And again, those are gleaned through a number of different ways, but the 8 that we have, the key to it is obviously good governance, and that starts with the City Council and its leadership with budget, starts with staff, executive staff, making sure that we have good governance in all of our areas. We also then look to have a thriving and vibrant local economy, sustainable natural environment, a safe and healthy community, recreational, cultural, and lifelong learning opportunities, orderly and well-managed development, which I know is becoming more and more of a concern, effective mobility and reliable infrastructure, and lastly but not least, and not unimportant at all, is the fact that we want to have attractive neighborhoods and we want to engage and a welcoming feel to our community in general. So we're going to continue to provide programs and services that are in alignment with these 8 goals, as well as now the goals that you've established with your strategic plan. And we're going to touch on that a little bit this evening. Mr. Wolf is going to give you a reminder later about filling out your matrices. Those of you who haven't done that yet, please do that with relationship to evaluating those 6 key areas. So as we look again at our budget, we look at 2 categories. First one is fiscal health. And it sounds like it stands to reason, but I think our federal government doesn't understand this. Sometimes the state doesn't either. But we need to spend it within our means. And we certainly have to do that because we're required by state statute as well as your own internal policies. And again, as a reminder, we have an internal policy called the structurally balanced budget that requires us to be structurally balanced. And that requires for us to spend within our means. Establish and maintain reserves is another aspect of fiscal health. Right now, I'm pleased to indicate to you that we have 27% of reserve right now of our general fund. That's probably the largest since I've seen here for the city of Englewood, which is a good thing. And those reserves, again, are set aside for any of a number of purposes. But more importantly, in some cases, those reserves are set aside to actually fund key capital projects and key initiatives that the council has decided to do. And so we'll be talking more about that as we go through the budget process as well to help you to have that understanding as well as setting aside funds for the ultimate replacement of capital infrastructure is a key component of council leadership. Next, understanding our variances. And I know that Director Wrinkle spends significant time on our financial reports each month to understand why do we have a variance. We look at budget to actual. Why are we over? Why are we under? Why are we seeing that our revenue is higher? Or why do we see that certain departments have seemingly spent more than they should during the budget? And there's always a good reason for that. But understanding those variances is very, very important to fiscal health so that we don't get to a point where we get through half of a year and next month in July you'll be doing the 6-month review and we'll be spending more time than, again, we normally would on a monthly financial report to understand key variances for the half year, for the first 6 months of 2018. Next, we want to be transparent about the true cost of doing business. And so it's been a hallmark of the staff, myself and my team, who is just incredibly good to work with, to make sure that we are doing things with transparency. Not to mention implementing the very tools that allow people to get onto our website and look at budget to actual, look at expenses, even P-card expenditures for all of us, council people included. Again, as a reminder, we have the Open Fiscal Portal, Open Englewood Portal that anybody can access 24 hours a day, 365 days a year this year, or 366 previous years because of leap year, to get on and look and see where we are with our expenses and revenues. And then lastly, we are really working diligently to ensure we incorporate long-term planning into decision-making, and so that you're not making decisions predicated on 1 year at a time. And this has been a difficult thing for us as a council and as a city, because the budget process just seems so exhausting, right? That you get to the end of the time and you're like, whew, we just approved the next year's budget. But we have to take a longer-term view of where are we, and do we have headwinds or do we have significant challenges facing us? And we know as a community now in Englewood that the biggest challenge we have is infrastructure and being sure that we can maintain the very infrastructure we have, not necessarily add to it, but maintain the infrastructure that we have and pay for it. And so that'll continue to be a challenge, and we are going to be baking in to budgets the ability to, again, plan for longer-term fiscal expenditures and impacts with our capital projects and to ensure that we have sustainable infrastructure over time. So I know that was a long explanation of fiscal health, but again, I think it's important that the public as well as the council recalls that these are the fundamental building blocks upon which our budget is done. So, general fund, we're going to look at some revenue forecasts. Again, we'll quickly go through this, but I mentioned earlier, you can see a preponderance of our income comes through use and sales tax. And so it's significant. It's nearly 60% of our budget. That should be somewhat concerning, again, in years in which there are disruptions in the economy. We go back to 2007, 2008. We know exactly what happened. We had a recession. That had a tremendous impact on Englewood. And at the time, I'm not here to again, look back and be the armchair quarterback for the staff at the time, but decisions cast then are still impacting us today. But there are some good things as well. The service levels didn't drop. They did some furloughs and things like that, but we need to be prepared for such a day as September of 2007, when the economy seemingly slid into an abyss that some areas of America are still trying to crawl out of. Denver, we're blessed because of the diverse nature of the economy here, but we need to be prepared for that and understand that our dependence upon sales tax is tough. Again, especially with the economy today. I was just talking to some individuals that are commercial brokers, and sometimes you have to be wary of what commercial brokers say, but basically they were sharing an article from a magazine from the Institute of Shopping Centers, and basically it was an article called The Retail Apocalypse. And so there is a retail apocalypse. You're seeing a lot of brick and mortar stores closing, and that has an impact, and it's hitting Englewood as well. Kmart is a good example. Although one could say Kmart has been on life support for many years, which they have, the fact of the matter is they provided sales tax to the city of Englewood that was quite robust. Now, that's obviously being replaced somewhat by internet sales, but internet sales are starting to have a really tough impact on the local brick and mortar stores, and so we're starting to prepare for the day that we could see a further decline in the sales tax growth because of that, because more people are using Amazon, or more people in the millennial ages are bartering, they're trading, exchanging, and they're using things that didn't exist many years ago. Let Go and Get Rid of This and those types of sites that people can go to and sell, and they're not paying sales tax to the city. And we're going to see more and more of that. And so I'm not advocating for any taxes. I'm just explaining right now that what's transpired. And so you can see here that our property tax is a very small piece of this particular pie. And that's about, in this fiscal year, we're about $4 million of a total of $47 million. So it's a very small figure. So where are we going in the future? So again, if you look at this was unaudited before, but obviously now that the Kaffir is done, the audit's complete, you can see where we ended up. Sales and use tax, about $28 million came in. $3.4 million in property tax, and then all other revenue sources. Those include grants, fines and forfeitures, other things were about 15.5. So a total of about $47 million. And our budget for 18 again was $47.3 million, and I think we probably hit that, Kathy. So this is an older slide that we haven't updated yet, but will be. So our forecast again for going forward is that we're going to see, we believe, a very conservative number using state demography data again of about 3% is what we're proposing to see some growth. Very conservative. Obviously, we've exceeded that in previous years, but we want to err on the side of conservatism when it comes to where revenues are, as well as our expenses, so that we don't get ourselves into trouble. You can see, again, going out, we have a trend of looking at that same percentage of growth. And again, that assumes that it's basically not a choppy seat. So in other words, property tax changes. We're going to see $4 million, we believe, this next fiscal year in 19. There will be a revaluation of real estate, again predicated upon comparable sales that will take place or transpire in 19 that will not be reflected until 2020. So our real estate will be revalued again, and I know that has impacts upon our residents and our businesses because of the formulation for how taxes are done for property. If you're a residential user, you like the fact that Gallagher Amendment ratchets down that figure, and it went from 7.62 down to 7.26, I believe, unless I'm dyslexic. But what happens is that the commercial property valuation then goes up to ensure that the pool is the same size, so that cities and other taxing entities get that same amount. So in other words, our commercial properties pay a disproportionately larger share of our property tax than what the residents do. But that's, again, the way that Tabor is set up, and that's how it's worked and will continue to work. So we look at sales and use tax again. Again, you can see where I was enunciating to you that we are seeing 3% increase. We did program a 2% increase in beyond 2020. again, because economists are saying that we're probably going to see another recession that might not be as wide sweeping as what we saw 2007 to 2009. So 2% was utilized. You can see, however, that the Colorado retail trade sales have been always higher. But again, we want to be conservative and not go 5.4 or 5.7% as been in the past, or even 5.1, which they were forecasting for 2019. We used a smaller figure because we want to stay with that conservative figure. And then if you look at the CPI, or the Consumer Price Index, and this is for all urban consumers. And so this looks at all urban consumers across the entire U.S. You can see where that CPI growth is. And why are we concerned with the CPI? Because a lot of contracts that we bring to you sometimes are tied to CPI, or the cost of goods and services. And basically all that's saying is that the people who live in urban areas are going to see, or will see by trend, in 2017 at 3.4%. We're using the state's figure again for 19 and beyond of 2.9%, and then it kind of decreases a little bit over time. So revenue assumptions, you can see our property valuation, assessed valuation right now in 2018 is $685 million. That brings in roughly that $4 million in tax, property tax, and you can see where we're proposing to see that go. We see a little bit of dip again in going into 2020. I'm not sure why we see that slight dip, but again, we want to be conservative rather than too aggressive with that. Property tax, again, you can see the difference between property and commercial. We won't spend too much time there. So let's look at all other revenue sources. So this year, we anticipate about 15.4 from all revenue sources. Going into 19, we're proposing to see about 16.1 million, or a 2% increase. And again, the reason for that is we now have a fully staffed police department, where so fines and forfeitures are increasing. You have a new municipal judge, so we're seeing fines and forfeitures increasing. And that has an impact. It's not to say that, again, an indictment on what's gone on in the past, but when you see a change in leadership like that, sometimes that's what happens. And so we're starting to see that reflect in our balance sheet. Additionally, too, aside from that, we are seeing some opportunities for additional grants, and so that's part of our other revenues, which helps. So let's look at a general fund expenditure forecast. So again, this is by department. You can see where the large departments are, and I know it makes it look like the city manager's office is tremendous. It's not. The big part of that is the fire contract, which my office administers. And so this year, the fire contract is $5.7 million. That will increase by 3% for 2019. And so that number is going to continue to increase. But as you would expect, our two largest expenditures are public safety and then community services that are community facing. And so that would be Parks and Recreation and Public Works. The percentages are here. So you can see that police is at about 29.4%, Parks and Recreation is at 15.9%, and Public Works is 13.5%. You're probably going to see a growth in Public Works, as well as you should, because we have infrastructure and cap projects that we are running through them, as well as an increase in their operating budget to ensure that we're providing the maintenance that's necessary for our streets and our roads and our bridges. So again, looking forward, this year's budget, 47.3. We are forecasting that small increase, 3%. So we look at about a $48.7 million budget in 2019. So fund balance. We've talked about this before. You've heard us use the term fiscal cliff. And the fiscal cliff never really goes away, but because we've seen, again, larger increases in revenue than we anticipated, as well as underspending. And underspending is not something necessarily that we're totally proud of, because in some instances it's because we didn't finish projects that needed to be done that were critical. That comes with any of a number of reasons, but I do like the fact that we continuously look at this on a monthly basis, and in some cases bi-weekly basis with our expenses to ensure that we are on target. But capital projects have been a problem for us, and we're going to talk more about execution of capital projects here in the next couple weeks. We'll hit that timeline in a little bit here to go over that, to discuss, but cap projects are part of why we have been able to add to the reserves, and we need to be able to to look at things and execute and finish projects as we proposed. So if we're looking at these lines here again, you've got the reserve policy, and that's roughly 17% of your general fund. 16.7% is our policy that's in your reserve policy there. And you can see where that sits. It's a little over $8 million for this year, and it grows a little bit more into 2019. The red line that's up here is the actual reserve. And so as we mentioned earlier tonight, you're at about 28% reserve, which is very, very good reserve policy to have. It's 27% plus change. However, again, because of the fact that we have a reserve policy, but we have constraints and we've been pulling money out of our reserves to perform projects as well as balance the budget, those reserves are going to be diminishing. And there are some reserves that you never touch, such as the Tabor Reserve. You never want to touch that. If you touch that, you have to replace it. And we just keep that as, again, a set percentage by the state statutes for our budget. The other reserve that we haven't touched, and again, the council has made this very clear as part of its policy with the long-term asset reserve fund. That also has an impact, and you can see how the long-term asset reserve fund continues to grow. That's a good thing to a certain extent. I think at some point in time the council will want to enunciate its desire to what to do with that reserve. We count that as part of our overall reserve. But we get into trouble between 2020 and 2021 at this rate, as of right now. Again, as been the case over previous years, we don't want to say the sky is falling, but we need to be prepared for the imminent fact that at some point in time, our revenues and expenditure lines are going to cross. And when that happens, we're in big trouble. Then we're going to have to look at reducing our expenses some way. And for us as a city, our major expenses, our biggest expenses come on two legs. They're our people. And we have some really good people here, and we want to make sure that we can still maintain that. And they do a good job forward-facing with our public as well as internal services. And so we have to continue to find ways in which to remain competitive with our pay and benefits and compensation, while at the same time ensuring that we can be sustainable over the long haul. So again, here's the fund balance. We've talked about that quite a bit. Again, we're higher than what's this shown. We're more along the lines of the 26.8%. But again, we expect that we'll be hitting that, keeping that level of reserve going into 2019's budget and beyond. So capital funds, again, this is important to enunciate. Again, we have two major sources of capital funds. We place them in either the PIF or the CPF, and I don't want to use a bunch of acronyms, but PIF is Public Improvement Fund, and CPF is the Capital Projects Fund. And those two funds largely deal with any non-utility related expense or non-enterprise fund expense. And so you can see where we are and where our expenditures have been. On average, the past few years, we've been about $6 million on average with capital project expense spending. And so we feel like that's what it's going to take to keep going. That, however, does kind of cover the fact that we need a lot more to really handle all of our capital projects that we've got, but that's the level of expenditures we've been able to apply to capital projects historically. This is a very, very complex slide, but we'll quickly go through this and then skip it. But because we're going to spend a lot of time next week and beyond. I think actually the 11th is next week. I can't believe it's June already. Yep. We're going to be talking a lot about capital next Monday night and where we are with that and where we're going. But this again just shows you on average from the PIF some of our revenues and expenses. So total revenues for the PIF, again, come from a number of different sources. There's the vehicle use tax, which every time you register your vehicle, we know it's expensive in Colorado. I can't apologize for that because we don't set that tax, but it's high. We do get a share of that, and you can see that has grown over the past few years, but people are not buying new automobiles as much, as we heard last week from Director Wrinkle. And so that has an impact on how much the city would receive then from the share back of that vehicle use tax. But again, roughly for this year, we're looking at $1.9 million. Another use is the building use tax. And again, this is predicated upon large projects or even small home projects that track sales tax specifically for an Englewood project. That fluctuates again from year to year. Last year was about 1.7. This year we're thinking it's 1.3, but it might be more than that. We never know specifically when a large commercial project may come through. We're trying to do a better job of getting that type of optic, looking through those types of lenses. So we talked to some of our major industrial and commercial uses like the hospitals and large manufacturers. Are you going to be doing any major improvements? So we can try to forecast that. But again, it's sat about the same over the past few years. Road and bridge, we do get road and bridge funds from Arapahoe County that go into that, and there's also the Highway User Tax Fund, the HUTF funds that's there. Intergovernmental revenues come as well, and that fluctuates as well because that's predicated largely on grants that are non-CDBG in nature. And then lastly, again, there's other revenues that we receive, and that's largely interest income that we set aside from time to time. So from looking at financing sources, you can see that fluctuates too because we want to keep monies in those particular reserves, the PIF and the CPF, and so you can kind of follow that. But we're going to be digging into that next week, so we will not spend too much more time on that tonight. Debt service. This is very, very important for us all to understand. You can see that we have several outstanding debts that we're paying debt service upon. The yellow or the goldenrod that's on top is the certificates of participation for this building that we're in today, Civic Center. It's not just this building, it's the entire 53-acre City Center Englewood site. We pay $1.5 million a year, basically on debt service retirement for that. Largely it's our lease that we have with the Englewood Environmental Foundation. That's going to continue, and the last payment you can see is going to be made in 2023. Then that goes away, and the city will have $1.5 million in perpetuity beyond that, then to apply to other projects and other sources. So we keep that in mind. When we talk about long-range planning, we're thinking about what do we do when that time hits? Well, there's going to be significant capital expenditures on this building that need to be done. Roof, elevators, a lot of the mechanical is all the same genre or the same age. So we need to be setting aside some funds to replace those types of componentry. The orange debt is the police headquarters debt, and that's the $27 million par with the premium of 32.8 that we'll be repaying through the year 2036. And then lastly, we have the Parks and Recreation debt, and so that also goes away in 2023. That was for the Englewood Recreation Center expansion as well as Pirates Cove. That debt, as you can see, is roughly about $2 million, which generates about $1 million a year. The last year it decreases because you're just paying off the last piece of principal. And so at that point in time, that additional mill levy that people see on their tax bill goes away completely. So in theory, you will see a reduction in taxes. And so it's something to contemplate, again, given the National Citizen Survey results where people said, hey, we really want to see some parks and recreation improvements. How are we going to pay for that without a funding source? This may be a conversation the council may have in the future to look at producing another $2 million worth of continued ask from the community to help pay for parks and recreation type improvements going forward. But we'll have time to talk about that policy request later as well. Enterprise funds, it's important to enunciate and understand what those are too. Again, for the public, an enterprise is separate from the general fund. Enterprise funds are designed to stand alone with respect to its revenues and expenses. And the charter is very explicit with respect to how the two are supposed to interact. One cannot subsidize the other in either case. The enterprise fund cannot subsidize the general fund can't subsidize the enterprise. It's not to say that from time to time, an occasional loan or an infusion of cash to help pay for something that has a rational nexus for one of those funds or the other could not happen. They can, but they're separate. And so looking at our water fund, we're projected to have about $10.8 million moving into this year. We anticipate flat growth there because we haven't adjusted any of the fees for the water fund or the sewer fund for that matter. And the big change in the sewer fund for this particular fiscal year that we're in is for some major capital projects that we're performing at the plant itself, as well as the potential, and I say potential because it's not a done deal at this point in time, is for the biogas project that this council as well as the Littleton City Council will entertain at your joint meeting on July 19th. Stormwater Drainage Fund is a very important fund. That fund obviously looks at the drainage infrastructure for the entire city, and as the council is acutely aware, we do have additional needs here at this particular fund, which we haven't addressed. We will be looking to work with the Urban Drainage and Flood Control District at some key projects that are going to impact northeastern Englewood, as well as the Little Dry Creek, which is over here, where the Little Dry Creek Plaza. That pond has failed. The bladder that keeps the dam up has failed, and we want to do away with that and change the nature of how that operates or how it looks over the next couple of years. And that's going to require some infusion of funding. And right now, I believe that people pay $7 a month to the storm drain utility on their utility bills, but that is insufficient to obviously handle the $25 million Northeast Englewood flood hazard mitigation project, which, again, we believe that half of that would be covered through our association with the Urban Drainage and Flood Control District, but it's still going to require us to increase funds. That has an impact, really, for the entire community. Again, this particular project is longer term because we're really dependent upon what Denver does with Dry Gulch and Harvard Gulch. And that particular project is not as important right now for them as it is the Globeville, Swansea, Elyria drainage project, which basically will allow Denver to dry that area, put that water into the South Platte. That's their major project right now. That's $1 billion project. That's with a B. And ours is only a $25 million project. And I did meet with the Public Works Director of Denver. And again, he's new from the last time that we met, enunciating our desire to try to come up with some form of some sort of solution, short-term solution for Englewood, and utilizing some Denver parks as temporary for detention of water after storms that occur. So they're thinking about it. We have a golf course fund. That fund, you can see where we are right now. Right now, that fund balance is building, and it's a good thing to a certain extent, but it's bad for another. Right now, we still have over $2 million in debt that needs to be retired at the golf course, the Broken Tee course. Plus, we also have some major cost drivers or expenditures that need to be made, including the back 9 irrigation system needs to be replaced 100%, some bunker improvements, so some failed bunkers, as well as just the general aesthetics and or facelift of the clubhouse that needs to happen. The last one was in the late 80s, early 90s, and so there's some expenses that need to transpire there. We need to figure out how to deal with that fund itself. Concrete Utility Fund, Council is very aware of that, but for the public, our Concrete Utility Fund, many residents who are in the program are assessed a fee for the concrete that's adjacent to their property based on frontage, and that ultimately goes to the repair and replacement of curb, gutter, and sidewalk in front of their property. With construction the way that it is right now in Denver, the cost of this, as we just discussed a few weeks back when you approved a contract with Silva Constructors, concrete's gone up. And we're not able to go as far as we used to with that particular expenditure, and that's painful, but we have to pay the same price as the market bears, obviously, or desires for that work to be done. But we are still very aggressively dealing with failed concrete all throughout the community. If your constituents, our residents, my neighbors have talked to me because some people's curbs are sprayed with pink, and they're like, hey, why does this have a red dot or a pink dot on my curb? And these arrows, what's that mean? That means it's going to be replaced in 2018. So there's going to be some communication here shortly on that particular program, so people will know that their curb, gutter, and sidewalks can be replaced. We still have a housing rehabilitation fund. This is a program or vestige of the neighborhood stabilization program from the 80s and 90s. That fund still exists, but the program in and of itself does not. We obviously still provide energy-efficient Englewood grants, largely predicated upon CDBG dollars, but this particular program and fund still exists. So we talked about funding opportunities and policy options before. We have a lot of opportunity here in Englewood. There's still a lot of interest in development. We're still seeing a lot of construction on a commercial basis as well, which is very, very important. We still have opportunities to create jobs. And as you're acutely aware too, Council, our focus no longer is on bringing in the large retailer because the large retailers don't exist. Our focus now is on providing programs that grow small business or medium-sized business and encourage them to remain in Englewood and stay and grow. One of the things that you can have is, increase your sales use tax rate. Then these are all policy considerations. They're not recommendations by any stretch of the imagination. You could look for an increase in property tax rate. Use tax compliance. One of the things that we're doing right now is a lot of the finance department is now fully staffed with auditors. We have 2 again. And so 2 auditors are not hassling people, but they've found in some instances wherein businesses have operated in Englewood for a long period of time and not paid use tax. And so that has helped to bring in additional revenues that should have been brought in years ago but are now just being realized today.
Can I ask a question on that?
Yeah.
Can we get for the last 2 years as we've come on with these auditors, the audits that have been done, and if any of those businesses that were audited left the city?
Sure.
Because I want to make sure that we have certainly a fair, reasonable program, but I've heard some issues with it, and I just want to know if it has been after the audit, whether they left.
Okay. Fair enough. We can do that.
That'll give us a guideline on whether the other side of it, the equation, thinks it's fair.
Sure. No.
Thanks.
Yeah. No, we can do that. We've actually had some people, and it wasn't city staff that proposed this, but again looked at an occupational tax, and that may be something that comes to you not for this year, obviously, but for the future, but through a board and commission. But people are saying, hey, that could be a way of again getting revenue, and that's a tax. We don't have a local income tax, but it's a flat fee tax per person working here. So threats to Englewood. Again, outside city sales tax, Area 7. You look at Area 7 each month, and you see that it's pretty robust now, but if people stop buying products outside Englewood and our people basically, our consumer spending index or consumer confidence index goes down, that could go down. And that's a big concern. Again, we mentioned earlier online sales. We're starting to see Amazon paying sales tax. They're getting more robust each month as they put in their algorithms for catching folks who live in Englewood, 80110, 80111, and 113, to ensure that money comes here. That's good. Again, I mentioned bartering and garage sales, and the big one for us that's a threat is the Federal Reserve interest rate increase. When the interest rate increases, people are unwilling to enter into larger loans to buy homes as well as to buy cars. Car loans are going up as well. So capital funding, we've talked about this before. There's opportunities there. As enunciated with the, again, National Citizen Survey results, the survey results indicated that residents would be open to entertaining another general obligation bond or some other method of taxation to help fund recreational road improvements, bridge improvements, but not golf. You saw that very clearly. Some sort of increase to help cover that. We don't have a plan yet, and we would be irresponsible to go to the public without a plan. We won't bring anything forward until we actually have a capital improvement program and plan in place to bring to council that makes sense before anything is done. Not to mention, again, we looked just a few slides back at some debt that's expiring. How can we look at taking advantage of the expiration of that debt to increase our capital projects spending as well without having to increase taxes? So threats, the PIF, the Public Improvement Fund source of revenue, obviously are not keeping pace with the needs. We've been fairly flat year over year with respect to revenue growth in that area, and so we have to be cognizant of that. And then obviously taxpayer funds kept in general fund above the reserve policy are not being well used. We want to keep them liquid, and so keeping them liquid has a cost. We're not able to invest that to get a better interest rate. And right now, while interest rates are increasing for you to borrow money, the banks aren't certainly giving you a higher interest rate for your money that they're using. So we have to look at ways in which we can find ways of having enough liquid asset, but also investing other assets that are above and beyond that reserve policy to help get you a better return on your money. So I do want to quickly go over the schedule here of coming attractions and where we're headed. Within your packet, you should have received also a 2019 timeline. So some of the important things that are going to transpire for you as a council are as such. So we are today at June 4th. Tomorrow night, like I said, June 5th, the capital projects list is going to the Planning and Zoning Commission. June 11th, we are going to have a presentation on capital. That'll be capital from 2019 through 2023. So that'll be the 5-year capital plan. It'll be rudimentary from the standpoint that we won't have the ability to bake in any recommendations from the P&Z. Also, we won't have the ability to bake in anything that you're going to be doing through your scoring of the matrices of capital. So keep that in mind as well. But we will also hear next week from the first of several budget groups, and that first presentation that you're going to hear from is the Reliable Infrastructure and Well-Managed Growth Programs group. And so that's going to cover a whole host of programs and services that are provided by many different departments across the city that are in alignment with reliable infrastructure. So you'll hear from them in well-managed growth programs. Then on the 25th of June will be the next major presentation that you're going to have, and you'll be able to hear from several operating budget teams, including teams talking about a thriving and vibrant local economy, engaged neighborhoods, recreational learning opportunities, sustainable natural environment, and safe and healthy communities. So that's going to be huge. That'll be a huge night on the 25th. From there, 2 dates that I want to make sure that you have on your calendars. We don't necessarily have the venues nailed down yet, but that'll be July 11th and July 18th. That's 2 successive Wednesdays. Those Wednesdays workshops will be budget-related out in the community. And so we're looking for venues, specifically District 4, that hit some of the areas that people feel disaffected from Englewood, mainly west of Santa Fe, if we can figure that out. And then, obviously, somewhere else in the community on the north side, we're still looking for venues. But we'll get that nailed down, and Mr. Wolf is going to be talking to you in the coming weeks as well about the nature and content of those workshops and whether or not there's an opportunity for council to participate in facilitating them. So, council, that is the overview, quick overview of where we are with budget. While all this is going on right now, with respect to this kind of talk, departments just had opened up last Friday the Tyler New World system, which is our enterprise resource planning software. They're now able to go in and are entering in their line item budget detail, which comes to me, and then I have to go through and look at that and evaluate those particular requests and asks, roll that into what will include capital budget requests from you and the community to ultimately present the budget to you in the preliminary budget on the 7th of September. So that is all building towards that date, which then will allow for the public hearing on the budget on the 17th of September. So that's the budget in a quick nutshell.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions or comments for the city manager? The overview of where we're going is very helpful.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to do this. And speaking of well-managed and reliable infrastructure, I wanted to take just a couple seconds to introduce you, Council, as well as our community to our new Public Works Director, Maria DeAndrea. Maria, want to stand up? Maria's first day was today, and she came tonight.
Welcome.
Yeah, we're excited to have Maria. She's a professional engineer who is going to hopefully be able to bring a level of sophistication to our public works as well as our infrastructure, and ultimately begin to collaborate more, I think, with our water utilities as well, and wastewater collection utilities to make sure that we collaborate and have some good opportunities for growth in the future in those 2 areas as well. So we're blessed to have Maria. And that's all I have with this item for you tonight.
All right. Thank you very much. And unless there is something urgent, we will take a 5-minute break and resume next door at 7:30. Thank you very much. Adjourned.